The sitting is resumed. Any speakers? Senator Cameron, Dr. Rogers.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Mr. President, for affording me the opportunity to speak on this occasion. I'll be very brief in my remarks on this particular bill. I just wish to begin with some words from the Roman satirist Juvenal. Vis custodiet ipsos custodes. But who will guard the guards themselves? I suspect that that is where much of the contention comes surrounding this particular bill. But I believe that in my time here in the Senate, this is probably one of the more important pieces of legislation that we've been called to reflect upon, because this one strikes at the very core of our constitutional right to privacy. But I also have cause to reflect on it within the context of the time in which we are at this point in time. We are still in the season of emancipation. In fact, in a few days' time, we'll observe the Day of Remembrance of the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade, having observed on the 1st of this month emancipation itself. And it is not lost on me that we are part of a parliament that in 1661 passed the slave code, which took away freedoms and rights from people. And over the years, at least the last 75 years or so, as a people in this country, predominantly of African descent, we have governed ourselves. And it's just rather sad that we have to gather on this day to reflect on a piece of legislation that takes away freedoms from people. But why are we here? We're here perhaps because somewhere along the line, we did not tell the truth and the whole truth about ourselves to ourselves. And as a result of that, we've developed a society that is held together on consensus, but may somewhat be a facade. I'll quote from a document. It's actually a document, sir. Found in the Journal of Negro History. It's entitled Arthur Holt, Anglican Clergyman, Reports on Barbados 1725 to 1733. I do not share many of the views of Arthur Holt because as an Englishman coming to this island, he came with a perception of this great divide of the people of European descent being somewhat superior to those of African descent. But when he came here, he was almost disgusted by what he saw. I'll quote what he said. "As for those of our own complexion who lay a claim to our church, it will surprise your lordship to hear how many of them use religion. They may well be averse to a spiritual discipline, whose families are checkered with a color which heaven seems to have appointed for a living monument of their uncleanness, who debauch themselves with the infidel slaves and inhumanly subject their unhappy offspring to bondage." End quote. What Arthur Holt was saying here, and what disgusted him, is that the milk was being colored. That Barbadian slave planters had somehow gotten into relationships with the slaves, and many of their families, as he said, were not what he expected them to be when he came. I've highlighted that to make the point that that is the kind of society that we developed. But we developed it still with this strange notion of a division, first based on race and later based on class, that depending on where you were from, the hue of your skin, you could get certain privileges that others could not get. And that is the society in which we sought to build consensus. Consensus here within the context of a civic-minded society where people recognize their responsibilities and the state has responsibilities to persons. But when you build a society based on that, and then educate the people, you create a problem. And what we may well be reaping now are the centuries of a pernicious decay of our society, where it was built just on a strange facade of consensus. And as the functionalists will tell you, consensus is necessary for the society. But the conflict theorists will tell you when there's inequity and inequality, there's a need for force and laws. I think we've gotten to that point. And I hope that this becomes a seminal moment for us in Barbados to recognize that crime is not a political issue. Crime is not a political issue. I've had reason to recount the events of 1999 in the campaign, and we all know what happened there, where crime was used as a main issue for one of our political parties, and the other party found it a good opportunity to mock. I'm not saying that crime should have been an issue, but the reality is that when, as political entities within the country, we do not stand up and speak with one voice about what is happening in our jurisdiction, we empower the very ones whom we are trying to deal with. And so we've come to this point. So when we were not laughing at crime and violence, some were saying that an attorney general should resign because clearly he has no hand on crime. And then when the situation was turned around, that person said, well, the attorney general should resign because clearly he has no hand on crime. And then it was purported that the solution may be to crack some skulls and shoot some people. There was hanging, thank you. This is a problem we've been trying to deal with for a very long time. And I'm sorry that we've gotten to this stage, but perhaps we had to get here. Perhaps we had to hit rock bottom, because I perceive this to be rock bottom. And so the question is, why should we pass this law? Who will guard the guards? Well, in order to answer that question, sir, I will ask, who are the guards? Because I would like to believe that all of us around this table still believe in some element of civics and consensus within our society. And based on this legislation in the definitions, the authorized officers that have been placed in charge of this particular interception of communications operation are the Commissioner of Police and the Director General of the Anti-Corruption and Anti-Terrorism Agency. Now, sir, I cannot in any good conscience stand here and say that I doubt that the Commissioner of Police of Barbados, whoever he or she may be now or in the future, is not a credible person. I cannot say the same thing for the Director General of the Anti-Corruption and Anti-Terrorism Agency either. If I say that, then I am destroying the very consensus that I expect the society to be held together by. And these are the officers that have been placed here. If I stand here, as Senator Malalu rightly pointed out, and say I do not support this bill because it is going to look at people who are intent on committing murder, treason, terrorism, trafficking in persons, kidnapping or abduction, money laundering, well, I am joining with the very people who are seeking to destroy the community. The bill lays out very clearly the areas that are being investigated that will come under the microscope. If I intend to be a part of those, I will have to understand that I will fall under the law of this bill. But let us not fool ourselves. The Barbados in which we are debating this today is not the Barbados of 1999 when we were talking about crime and violence. It's not even the Barbados of 2018. Things have changed drastically. And I want to comfort members of the public based on what I have heard and what I have received. Today I was speaking to a former police inspector, and he said, that bill is very important. We need it. Nobody cares about what you're doing in your house down the road. What we care about is the people who are undermining national security. And as I said facetiously yesterday, sir, well, jokingly, any Barbadian who grew up in the 1990s knows about wiretapping. You only had to wait on a rainy night and pick up your phone. And sometimes the conversations were boring, but other times they were salacious.
But you did not listen.
I heard, but I did not listen. And we all know what used to happen. You pick up the phone, you hear something, and then you hear someone, you hear something? Put down and let me call you back. Sorry. We've been wiretapping for a long time. But this bill is important because of the context in which we find ourselves. And as I said, I hope this legislation is a wake-up call to us, or those who are involved in politics, to recognize that crime is not a political issue. As legislators, as persons seeking to lead this country and to direct the general course of this country, we must be willing to sit down and put our heads together and face the society with a common message. If not, we are empowering the very people that we are trying to suppress. We are giving space for the very activities that are undermining the safety of our communities. And so, sir, I just wish to offer my support to this bill with a word of caution. In the Bible, there's a particular passage in the book of Exodus. There emerged a king who knew not Joseph. I hope that there will not emerge a government that does not care about the general security of the country, but are more intent on destroying political opponents. Because I caution us, in the book of Esther, Haman built some gallows to hang Mordecai, and he ended up being the first person to be hung on those gallows. Let that be sobering for us. We will, by God's grace, pass this bill because we recognize the circumstances in which we find ourselves in this country where heinous crime is concerned. But we do so trusting that those who have been given this great responsibility will recognize the obligation that has been placed on their shoulders and use it only for the betterment and development and security of this country. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Reverend Canon Dr. Rogers. Senator, the Honourable Linda Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. President. I echo a lot of the comments which I've heard around this table today. And the truth is that I think we have to accept that we do have very serious issues in this day and age in terms of crime. Whatever is necessary to assist the police in terms of fighting the crime situation, we need to be able to assist them in doing so. And if this bill, which will probably become an act shortly, if this bill can help in some way in providing another tool in the toolkit of the police, or to be able to arrest the crime situation, then I think it needs our support. We've been complaining. So far this year, we had, I believe, about 30 murders. We've had in the previous year 50, not to mention the number of shootings. And really, everyone has been crying out for more to be done to arrest the situation, because ultimately it can impact the economic situation of the country. And therefore, we have said, and I've heard it said around this table in previous debates, that sometimes the government seems to be soft on crime. And we have to accept that if we need stronger legislation, and it gives the authorities an opportunity to be able to not only be reactive when we have situations, but also this can give an opportunity to be more proactive, to be able to arrest some of the situations which could arise before they happen. But of course, we have to accept that while there are certain guarantees under the Constitution, the rights to privacy as individuals, we have to be able to weigh our rights against our obligations, to be able to ensure that at the end of the day, if something has to be done in the interest of the public good, that we may have to recognize that in a way we could be ceding some little bit of our rights to privacy and so. So the question is then, how do we make sure that in introducing this legislation, it is robust enough, to ensure that those authorized persons cannot abuse the legislation. Because we have to balance the interests of the general public against what we allow our authorized people to do. And so we have to look at the legislation and ask ourselves, is the legislation strong enough to make sure, or at least to prevent, the abuse of the legislation? And I think when we look at it, we recognize that we have put in place, or that the legislation put in place, the necessary laws to ensure that if it is abused, at least if the possibility of it being abused is reduced. And that there's overriding authority to be able to monitor that what is done, to ensure that there's fairness. We also need to be, as in this situation, we have seen that the legislation requires a warrant to be issued, which must be issued by, and again, there is a limit to the people who can issue that. There has to be the Chief Justice or another judge designated by him. So these are the sort of things that we would have to look at and ask, are we satisfied that within this legislation there are sufficient safeguards to protect us as the general public from abuses? And I think that there were certain bits of offending legislation which the government was sufficiently minded to listen to the comments that were being made and to make some of the necessary adjustments to ensure more transparency in the overall legislation. So what I think we have to do, what is going to be necessary, is to make sure that it is adequate and proper training for those authorized to do these interceptions of communications. What we have to do is to make sure that this monitoring control is working as it should, and that and the legislation, no legislation is perfect. So where we find that there, as it becomes more used, and of course it may be questioned from time to time in a court of law, that whatever adjustments may become necessary to do, that will be implemented in order to improve as we learn more about the defects that may arise from time to time. So I think I do not think that we can take lightly the persons who have complained, who have raised concerns, who have been marching or because they have genuine concerns, because as individuals, we have our concerns. And privacy is something that is obviously dear and dear to all of us. We don't need our medical records, for example, and a lot of medical records are now on the systems. And so we don't need our medical records to get on, to somehow or in some way be captured. We don't need communications between legal representatives and their clients to be captured unlawfully. And so those are genuine concerns. We may have situations where a priest and his parishioner may have had a conversation or on a particular issue. Those should not be captured as long as they are lawful, and therefore you can understand the genuine concerns that have been raised in regard. And so, as I said, as long as we can be sure that the legislation is robust enough to be able to protect against abuses, then I think it can serve a useful purpose in helping to arrest our crime situation. And I would say that in those circumstances, it is worthy of support, and I would trust that we wouldn't see any abuses for which may cause us to have regrets or second thoughts if this legislation is finally passed. And with those few words, Mr. President, I am obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Ross. Speakers, Her Honor, the Most Honourable, Senator Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. If I may, I should like to start by congratulating Senator Trim on an excellent maiden speech. I welcome Senator Malalou back. And because I did not do so before, I should like to say that I want to thank Senator the Honourable former Senator the Honourable Crystal Haynes for her contribution. Mr. President, sir, this is a moment of some gravity in this Senate chamber, and it is as well a moment, I think, of some gravity and concern in the country. In thinking today about that moment, there are the words of a hymn that kept coming back to me over and over, and so that is the point on which, sir, I would want to rest my comments. Once to every man a nation comes the moment to decide in the strife of truth with falsehood for the good or evil side. Some great cause, some great decision, offering each the bloom or blight. And the choice goes on forever twixt that darkness and that light. I think that we are at a point, sir, where the country is being asked to side with this administration in the fight against a blight that threatens to overtake our society, to jeopardize our economy, to endanger the future of young people, and to tarnish our national reputation. Let us concede that there were some concerns which have been legitimately raised and legitimately addressed. But let us now go, sir, to the substance of what this country is being asked to consider and what this government is attempting to do. You see, a society needs to be vigilant against the abuses of governments and administrations. But the society need not fear this particular administration. The reason being that although this government has twice received the largest mandate ever of any government in our history, there is no evidence, although there is much fear-mongering, that this government is abusing its power to harm the citizen, to stifle dissent, or to interfere with rights of individuals in a prejudicial manner that reduces the quality of our democracy. What we have here is a government attempting to fight crime on every level. And sir, because there are so many people who are determined to say, I have nothing to do with the problem, it is the government's problem to solve, that the Honourable Attorney General has become the target of much abuse and vilification in this country for an issue not of his creation, and in fact, an issue which he has put multiple measures in place to suppress, address, and redress, sir. Let us look at some of these issues. Although there is fear and fear-mongering and criticisms, there is all of the call-in programs are still running with multiple people cursing the government daily. There are podcasts and TV broadcasts and radio broadcasts of people who are highly critical of the government. They curse ministers, they curse the prime minister, they call people mangy, musty, stinking, all kinds of things. But you hear this, you hear some of this on public commentary, you read it in social media. And this is a government that is not supposed to be allowing dissent, that is trying somehow to stifle citizens. But yet, people are marching freely up and down the country. Nobody is stopping them. There is no indication that anybody who has applied for a march to criticize any government policy or any member of the government has been stopped from doing so. Right? Foreigners, there is no African network or part of an African network feeding off of the a week's program, sir, criticizing, that is dedicated almost to criticizing the Motley administration. All of this is going on. And the government, the people are being sidetracked by a situation of fear that is being manipulated. But when you look at the reality, democracy in Barbados is alive. Freedom of speech has never been more robust. The forces from the media to non-media are aligning themselves against the government, and often you think that the government is mute in the face of some of the criticism because there really isn't harsh response to them. But this is a good thing because it says exactly that democracy in the country is alive and that you have nothing to fear from this administration, despite its large majority. We have been told in the past that the instant you had a Trident ID, that somehow government was going to target you. That has been proven to be false. We have been told in the past that once you got the COVID injection, people would stop getting pregnant. Well, sir, I don't know. I've seen. No, pass that age, please. Thanks be to Jesus. No, but sir, the reality is that many of the allegations about government policy and government's motivation for policy have been proven to be false in terms of what has been put into the public domain. This is yet another one around which a negative narrative has been created to push the gullible into fear. I remember a lady calling me in complete panic during COVID because legislation was passed at that time which allowed government to pick up your vehicle and ply it into use or international service if it became necessary. And it was that tool was put out as a ploy for government to create some kind of police state and take over people's private property. Well, that too was proven to be a lie. Sir, I could cite the multiple examples, but I don't want that to be the burden of my speech. I just want to pull a few of them to show the public how in every instance where these allegations of nefarious motive and conduct and intent by the government have been put out, that they have proven to be false. And I say to the people of Barbados, this is not a government that intends you harm. This is not a government that is abusing its majority. This is a government which has come to this parliament. And so let me pause. We are not an adamant government. We know what it is in this country for a prime minister to say, I was adamant, and they were adamant, and something had to give. So we all remember that. We are not here. This is not an adamant government, nor is this a flip-flopping government. When people raise concerns, when errors, and Senator Tate has often pointed to what she perceives as errors in legislation, as indeed others have. Amendments have been made on the floor, or they have been sent back to the lower chamber. Government has turned up with policy like what was it, Independence Day, when they wanted to change Republic Day to Independence Day to Republic Day. The public said none of that, and government said no problem. Your wish is our command. And we can give other examples. Yes, there have been examples of errors where amendments had to be made. Oh, no minister drafts legislation. The legal drafters can make errors, and when they do, when they're pointed out, they are redressed. But nobody has been harmed by any error that has been made. An error has been found here. An advocate has come to the public attention as a result. God bless him. Thank him for picking up the error for us, and it has been corrected. He can go back to wherever he was before and let us get on with the business of government. Sir, the point that I'm making, though I make it with some element of levity, sir, is that the government, despite the criticisms made against it, is responsive to national opinion and national sentiment. In a government that is such a large majority, with a prime minister who is said to be dominant in her view and her presiding over her cabinet and her party, this government has proven to be more reactive, responsive, reflective than any previous administration in our history. The reality is the government is doing what people want. Now we come to the point then, sir, of this particular legislation. I made the point in here, sir, in a previous speech, that you had grannies and aunties and other people hiding guns and so in their wigs and on their persons. Even Matt Finger laughed at me. But my words didn't hit the ground before a couple get called before, pulled before the court to be charged. And the reality is that often the police are frustrated by girlfriends, by grannies, by aunties, by mummies. A lot of the old ladies who lie down in the beds or in the wheelchair. Oh Lord, I's a sick woman. Oh God, let me get some air, bring the smelling salts. And the officers feeling for them. The guns are under them or wherever. The reality is, sir, this country has to make its mind up. Either we are going to be serious about the fight against crime, either we are going to cooperate as a society in terms of the measures being used to fight crime, or we are going to just say, well, it's the government problem. This is a national challenge. The government is doing its part and is rising to the challenge. And what we need is public cooperation. What we need is public support. What we need is public information. What the police need is the support of the society that they are trying to protect. And let me make the point, sir, that there have been multiple attempts by the administration to deal with the challenge of crime. The public complained when the police asked to have vehicles tints removed to lighter colors. I agree it is a nuisance and expensive. I believe I may have to change my own vehicle, my own tint. But the point is I'm willing to do it to keep policemen safe. We increased the number of trials and judges. People complained about that. We equipped the police better, improved their stations, improved their terms and conditions, added to their numbers, increased the number of special constables, increased financing available to them, moving their budget from $111 million to $148. That is not a small increase. That says that the government is putting resources where its mouth is and behind the problem. Senator Trim spoke eloquently to the kind of social programming that we have done to attack the problem from the other end. We have the Youth Corps. We have the lowest unemployment, the second lowest unemployment ever in our history. We have whistleblowers legislation to protect people who bring news of wrongdoing. We have when we came to government, we found that the scanners at the port were not working. We increased our vigilance and monitoring and oversight by ensuring that there were working scanners at the port. We have legislation which now addresses firearms in a more serious way. And we have legislation relating to bail, as well as ensuring that those who have committed multiple offenses or are charged with multiple offenses and come back charged with new murders or gun offenses cannot get bail in the same way. The government is doing everything that is recommended and that can reasonably be done. And in fact, many of the recommendations that the Democratic Labour Party is now seeking to put on the table are already in train, in progress, complete, well underway. The peace program is another program that has been vilified But if you look at it, sir, and that is not to say that the program has been perfect. There are multiple people who in the program, and their stories are on YouTube and social media. The public needs to go and follow some of those stories where some of the people who were involved in crime talk about their lives, are setting up community programs, are talking about the importance of turning their lives around, are helping to keep other young people at risk, young people in at-risk communities out of criminal activity. So it has had its benefits, but that too has been vilified. We hear about the PIECE program, meaning a peace, a weapon, or a piece of change. But sir, everything that the government is doing is subjected to criticism without thought and without suggestion. But when you look at the panoply of legislation, social measures, and other measures that are being put in place, including working with the police and ensuring that the police are equipped to do their job, you will see that the government is attacking the challenge on multiple fronts. Sir, nobody wants to know who is sexting, who coming by who when the night come. This is not what this legislation about. It's about the people who are fearful that you know, some of their activities will be known, and so this is not about that. This is about capturing the conversations of the criminals in Latin America when they're talking to the Barbadian criminals here and planning criminal enterprises. It is about the Trinidad gangs who are coming in to work and to infiltrate the local gangs to worsen the things here in Barbados. It is about when fellas are talking about how them can break in at Jordan's and steal the ATM, or at least attempt to, you will be able to find out, sir, that that is a plot that is being hatched. When men are talking about how they can drive around and hold up poor people and working people going legitimately to their jobs at bus stops, you will be able to track their chatter, sir. This is about protecting the ordinary citizen in the course of their daily life, in the course of their financial and economic activity. It is about protecting the citizen. It is about keeping money in their pockets. It is about keeping their children safe. It is about ensuring that you and I can walk freely at night without criminal elements taking over our country. And the fearmongers who are attempting to portray the government as a nefarious institution ought to be ashamed. And I am calling on them today to stand on the side of truth and right, to stand in the protection of our citizens, to stand against the criminals and on the side of all Barbadians. Sir, this is not a minor matter. It really comes down to what we want as a people. Either we are going to throw our hands up and surrender to the criminals, making all kinds of excuses for why no harsh measures should be used against them, or why every measure that is used is wrong, or we are going to stand with those who have spoken today in support of legislation that is intended to protect the public. And if the government abuses it, sir, I will be the first to say that I am not supporting any abuse of personal rights of our citizens, and I think the others on that side would do the same. This is not our intention, sir, to harm any single individual or to harm private citizens in the pursuit of their business, their private business of whatever type it may be. So I think that there is also a history here that we have, of which we have to be aware. It is interesting when I heard the criticisms made by the principal spokesperson for the Democratic Labour Party. It was that party which made an amendment to the Public Order Act many years ago that caused a great deal of concern in this country, and under which one person was actually charged. It is that party in its last iteration that enacted legislation so that if you cursed or insulted a police officer, you would have paid a fine of $10,000 or spent 3 years in jail. In the end, it was never proclaimed, that section, because of the protests of the Barbados Labour Party. There have been attempts over the years to change legislation. But the reality is, sir, that whether it is BLP or DLP, those changes to constitution or existing legislation which have sought to, on the surface, to abrogate the rights of the individual, those powers have never been abused by any government. That is not our history in Barbados. And that is not the history of this Barbados Labour Party, sir. In time, this is going to come to be seen as an essential piece of legislation. I think Trinidad had theirs in 2010, Jamaica in 2015, and people are going to wonder why it took us so long to effect the legislation. I remember, sir, I'm getting older, sir. I don't lament it. I enjoy it most days except for the arthritis in my right knee. But I remember when legislation was enacted that allowed the Barbados Defence Force to bear arms on the street, to come out and work with the police during crop over, to cooperate with the police on civic duties and patrols and activities. Sir, that was a big thing with a lot of protesting, a lot of criticism. It was said that we were going to use the defense force to shoot down citizens, that people had never seen guns so big and they were real frightened for them. Sir, I live to see now that you pass the route, people pass, the defense force could do what they walk up on them and move on. They don't worry about the guns anymore, sir. That is not what they're trying to raise when they start to walk upon the officers. These things have now become routine in the course. That's a fact. I mean, you had government boots as part of the Calypso criticizing the deployment of the defense force and so on. But no, it's routine. So that this legislation will become part of our routine arsenal of weapons against criminal activity, not just routine, but an essential element in our arsenal. So I would just wish to make the point that assurances have been given to us that there is strict prohibition in the legislation of effecting tapping, wiretapping without warrant, that the warrants require judicial oversight, that there is a restriction on the devices which can be deployed in this kind of activity. There is confidentiality in the matter and limited disclosure. So that, I think we had an example given by Senator Nurse of a communication between a priest and a parishioner, which should always be sacrosanct, or a doctor or lawyer and their client. Or patient, sir, that should be sacrosanct. The destruction of irrelevant or privileged records, strong offenses and penalties for any breaches, independent oversight and monitoring, operational safeguards and responsiveness. Sir, the point that I am making is that built into the legislation, despite all of the noise and the criticisms, are a number of safeguards to prevent, prohibit, and prescribe proscribe as opposed to prescribe. So proscribe abuse of the powers given under this legislation. This is not something that is going to be used by any politician against the citizen. Politicians will not have access. Earlier in the year, when we passed the legislation that dealt with the misuse of computers and related devices for inappropriate purposes which were classified as illegal under the Act. There was a lot of criticism then. Since then, however, despite multiple politicians being criticized in all kinds of ways, the legislation has not been exploited, used, or abused to harm a single Barbadian. And I reiterate, sir, the point with which I began, that this is not legislation intended for the majority or to harm the average Barbadian. It is intended as part of a suite of legislation or legislative provisions to protect the average citizen and to address the minority of people who are committing such severe crimes that they are virtually holding a society in terror and at ransom. The reality is that there are people who are not afraid to go out at night. There are people who by a certain time are locking down their windows and their doors. All kinds of safety hints and so are being passed around because a criminal element has been allowed or is appearing to run roughshod over the community. Well, sir, the government is taking multiple steps to rein them in. And at that point, a society has got to say, or I would urge the society to say, we don't know if it will work in its entirety, but something has to be done. And we are satisfied, sir, that the government is doing something. If the legislation has some kind of error or flaw, and that is understood in the future, we will bring it back and amend it as we have others in the past. But the one thing we will not do is weaponize this legislation against the average Barbadian. Sir, there are... I was going to start a new point, sir. Are you signaling 15 or you raised your hand twice? 10. Okay, sir. So I do not have time to really start on a new point. But I would make the point, sir, that crime cannot be fought by government alone. There has to be a whole of society approach. There has got to be support by the government. But you cannot say to the government, do something, and everything that we do from judicial means and measures, criminal intervention, policy initiatives, social policy initiatives, you cannot then say that everything that we do is wrong. And in fact, sir, nobody can say for sure that these measures are not working, because the reality is that without them, crime would be significantly worse. In one country in the Caribbean alone, one country, up to August, the police had killed 208 people. Police killed 208 people. We don't want to get there. And that is why a multidisciplinary approach is used between intervention, criminal intervention policies and social policies, sir. The challenge is balancing them, getting the mix of measures right, targeting the right people. This is a job that will be done by professionals. Sir, I have confidence in the professionals of Barbados. I have seen them operate at the highest levels. It is easy for someone to come in, cite a report that does not exist, is not public, vilify an individual who won a case against the very allegations that were repeated in here, and put all of that out in the public domain as if a person who served this country is now to be, his name is to be, I was going to say modified, sir, but I don't think that's a legitimate word, but you understand what I mean, sir. Modify his name, sir. It really is wrong. And it is wrong in the context, and I think that Canon Senator Dr. Rogers got it right, or was it Senator Nurse, who made the point. And the longer I'm around the political sphere, sir, the more I have come to see that there are a few things on which we must never divide politically. I don't care if you are BD, I don't have to have any other real political parties in Barbados. There's some elements, sir, I don't know what you would call them. But the reality is healthcare, education, and the safety and well-being of the public. We can agree or disagree on measures employing national policy. We can agree or disagree on the erection of statues and other things. But we cannot divide. We cannot divide on education when that has built this country. And it's a good thing to be able to restored free tertiary education. We cannot and should not divide on the matter of health care and fixing the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, because if you or I drop down, that is where we have to go. And we have to learn to treat the professionals there with respect, criticize them when criticism is due, but make suggestions or recommendations for how we can improve health care for all. I do not want to see in this country a further development of a healthcare system where if you have access to care because you have resources, and if you have not, then you can stay and suffer, and the devil take the hindmost. And the third thing, sir, is what is before us today. What is before us today? Old ladies coming into their yards are to be safe. People at bus stops must be able to go to work without fear. You must lock up your business when the night comes and go home and come back and find that all is well. Your staff and hospital staff are not to be attacked when they're going home at night. And I have to support this administration on the multiplicity of measures it has used to try to address crime in this country. And if you are asking me, sir, whether or not I support wiretapping, I do. Not because I am a member of the administration. I support it, sir, because I support the safety and well-being of every Barbadian. I support a safe Barbadian society. I support the future of our young people, and I support the safety of our economy. So I will vote today, sir, in support of this legislation. And I will not be distracted by the fear-mongering voices. It is like, I don't want to use as base an expression, sir, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, but in time, history will absolve this government. I'm much obliged to you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Thompson. Up next, Senator Kevin Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. And welcome to let me extend my personal welcome to Senator Trim. Sir, I joined the debate with the perspective of having almost a deja vu experience, because we have been here before. As usual, sir, I'll start with a recap of where we are, big picture. I intend to collide with the legislation, something that seemingly hasn't happened so far in terms of the specifics aside from the leader of government business. I plan to get a little granular and offer my perspective on the government's position, the stated position by the opposition and those in the public, as well as my own personal view. Sir, we stand at 32 murders so far for the year, 50 last year, 19 in 2023, 42 in 2022, 24 in 2021. It's not a good look, and we are here to do something about it. My approach is going to be very realpolitik, something unique for me. I will accept that, sir. And I'll start with disagreeing with my fellow independent Senator Canon, Dr. Rogers, who said that crime is not political. I disagree, sir. My observation has been that crime is political, and it's a vehicle, if you have certain ambitions, to be utilized. That's a fact. This is politics. The government has brought a set of legislation in 2025 in which it seeks to address the issue of crime. I have listened with care to the presentations in the other house. I listened to the Prime Minister on Sunday. I, for one, thought that it was very magnanimous in terms of the approach taken. It certainly differed from what happened in 2018 when there was a disagreement with what the government was doing, and some of us didn't have a political party to hide behind. So we took our scourging as it was, without the benefit of any friends. Now we find ourselves in a position where, again, the government is setting out what it needs to aid the fight. And let's take a look at it. In recapping what has been done, more judges, more resources for the courts, legislation passed, proceeds of instrumental of crime, offenses against the persons amended bill to allow the hanging, that was to deal with the crime, bail amendment 2019 to deal with firearms, bail amendment in 2024 to deal with the issue which was raised about the said firearms and how it was done, Firearms Act, judge-only trials, increased number of judges, several constitutional amendments, but yet the murders are here and where we are. So we find ourselves realizing that, yes, legislation is important, but as pointed out by Senator Trim, you also have to deal with the society. But here we are, the figures don't lie. So we could talk all around that we want about whose fault it is, who is saying what, who is misdescribing what. The facts don't lie. When I get up and I give the government commendation for the economic policy, and I say, look at the results, the facts don't lie. In a circumstance that we find ourselves with this level of murders, we have to look at the facts and recognize that they do not lie. That is the reality on which I am starting my contribution to the debate, Mr. President. The government's position has been, you want us to do something, and I'm paraphrasing, sir, you want us to do something, here we are. Here is the legislation. We will not abuse it, and I think that has been uttered several times this afternoon, even if not done before. And I don't want to use the colloquial, but I will use the colloquial, where this almost foo-foo, or is it poo-poo, the suggestion that the police would be listening to your private conversations. The opposition has said that the bill is bad and must be withdrawn. They've raised concerns about the independent commission. They've raised concerns about the the ability to get a wire interception without a warrant, that has been removed. And there were previous issues which were raised, and I was reminded this morning, and it's amazing, I always talk about people have short memories, and I am guilty of it, about the issues which attracted the attention of the nation in 2013. They are not unreasonable concerns to be raised. So when I see the Prime Minister addressing the issue on Sunday, I don't disagree with that. I think that shows leadership. And I think certainly we would have appreciated that in the past. Now, there are two sets of angles that I took in preparing for this afternoon, sir. I did my anecdotal, wherein I always report, he said it, my attempts to interact with friends, family, and rank and file pages, as I call them, and I was surprised. And I guess we all talk to different persons, as to how accepted the concept of wiretapping was, or recording was. In other words, as we have heard, you know in Barbados that if it's a late night and the rain falling, you know somebody listening. So is that who we are? Is that our society? Is that what we have become so accustomed to? Then there, the other comment I heard a lot was, but I ain't doing nothing wrong, so you can listen to me all you want. Then I hear, but you got these, I used to be telling Bill Gates, I used to be telling Mark Zuckerberg and them fellas all that you're doing, so why you worry about the government? It was so interesting. Legally, I then went and looked into the whole concept of the right of privacy. And I know my brother, Senator Nichols, will speak on it at length. But at the end of the day, the concerns raised by persons as to this concept of a right of privacy presumes this absolute right. But there is no absolute right to privacy. So while we recognize that you have a right for your private conversations, that right is subject. And why that's important is the messaging, and I'm going to come back to the messaging, which is the responsibility of the government. And I'm going to say why at the end of my speech. So this right of privacy is not an absolute one. And as the Attorney General reminded, only in 2018, the CCJ codified it as such. In any event, this right is subject to two things. You have to have a reasonable expectation to this privacy, and of course, there's a proportionality issue. So my way of describing it, you have a right to privacy if you are sending a WhatsApp risking at somebody. You have a right to privacy that's reasonable. You ought not to have that being monitored. But you do not have a right to privacy if you're planning a murder. That's a nice way of distinguishing what is a reasonable expectation of privacy and what is not. Now let's look at the bill itself, sir, the actual legislation that we're here debating in its modified form as amended. Yeah. Itself is described as a bill, you know I like to read this, sir. Every time I come I read the objects and the reasons. A bill to make provision for the interception of communications, comma, the acquisition and disclosure of data relating to communications and the acquisition of the means by which the protected communications may be accessed and placed in an intelligible form and for connected purposes. That's a lot. It's not just wiretapping. Let's look at what communications is defined as, sir. Somewhere here. There. Actually, I don't have it here in the disclosure orders. I will come back to it. So we have private communication. Private communication means a communication that's transmitted or being transmitted by the sender to a person intended by the sender to receive it in circumstances in which it would be reasonable, come back to that word, for the sender and the intended recipient to expect the communication will not be intercepted by any person other than the intended recipient. So if I'm sending you a WhatsApp, Mr. President, and includes any radio-based, RF telephone communication that is treated electronically or otherwise for the purpose of preventing intelligible reception by any person other than the intended recipient. That's a lot of big words, sir. Telecommunications follows, sir. And private telecommunications network, electronic signature, and telecommunications include, sir, the transmission, emission, or reception of signals, writing, pulses, images. So, sir, one of my favorite shows is The Wire. Wire is an HBO show about crime in Baltimore. I love it bad. And what the police did to intercept and to crack the bad behavior or the criminal enterprise, when they had their wire up, the fellas were communicating with pictures. It was a picture of a clock, and where the long hand was would tell you where the meeting point was, and the short hand would tell you what time to get there. So you see, this wide definition, sir, is not just about what you're saying, but it's also what you're sending that's being caught. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. So the information that's being caught or being dealt with by this legislation is not just what you're saying on the phone. It's the communication over the networks. It's all communication. You ain't saying things safe now, it's smoke signals. But I digress. The bill itself, sir, and I heard the rhetoric by the opposition, and I heard the position of the government. Sir, in researching the bill, I came across a document which, as always, I will make available for members of the House by an organization called HIPCAR, HIPCAR, which is dealt with the harmonization of ICT policies, legislation, and regulatory procedures in the Caribbean. And I'm looking at a report, sir, titled Interception of Communications, and they provided a model policy guideline and legislative text. And the date of this document, sir, and it's done by CARICOM and the EU, sir, was 2012. 2012. And in researching this issue, which dealt with the legislation, it involved CARICOM, it involved the Caribbean Telecoms Union, it involved the European Commission, it involved the International Telecommunication Union. And the aim of this meeting and this big pretty document was to provide model policy guidelines for legislation. And the legislation that they provided the guidelines for is the legislation that the government has tabled for us this afternoon. It is the legislation which has been utilized in other Caribbean territories. And an examination of the report perhaps would provide some understanding as to the issues which we are all dealing with now and the context for it. Sir, the aim of the document was in order to ensure the input of all the necessary stakeholders. They created working groups. So they had the ICT policy and legislative framework, which dealt with 6 sub-areas: e-commerce, privacy and data protection, interception of communication, cybercrime, and access to public information. Freedom of information, which we do not have. ICT policy and legislative framework on telecommunication, which dealt with the sub-areas of universal access, service, interconnection, and convergent environment. They were working groups in dealing with the issues that we are now discussing. So the 2 sections I went to this document to look at, which were the sections which have raised and engaged the public. The first one, section 5.2, which is no longer here thanks to some would describe the valiant efforts of certain persons in certain places. Now, I personally have no issue with section 5.2 because that was specifically contemplated that you can create certain scenarios where a warrant is not necessary for wiretapping, and I'll go to why. The other section which caused concern is section 25 in relation to the Independent Monitoring Commission, wherein certain areas were saying the Independent Monitoring Commission was not strong enough, questions with regarding to the appointment, questions with regarding to removing persons who were set up. So let's look and see what the HIPCAR recommendation was. HIPCAR recommended, sir, on this draft legislation, which we don't have to follow because we are Barbadians and we are leading edge. But sometimes we follow things when convenient. I like a little precedent, but I understand not all precedents are convenient. So, sir, section 5.2 as proposed says, under 3, or section 5.2, which is no longer there, the draft HIPCAR says, a person does not commit an offense under subsection 1 where the communication is one sent by a person who has consented to the interception, and B, an authorized officer believes that the interception of communication is necessary for the purpose of an emergency or preventing death or injury or any damage to a person's physical or mental health and or mitigation any injury or damage to a person's physical or mental health or in the interest of national security. It goes on to say, note, a country may restrict decriminalization by establishing additional requirements. Trinidad, Jamaica, Grenada say, hey, one of our additional requirements is mutual assistance. We talk about gangs traveling freely. If you have a situation where you need to get the wiretap up and running quickly, you may not have time for a warrant. I understand with the removal of section 5.2 now, the government's position is that they will rely on the emergency provision in the draft legislation. In my mind, sir, there is clear basis for it, but I understand the need to meet persons and to come to consensus. So the government has done consensus in removing section 5.2. In my mind, section 5.2 did not need to be removed, but gratefully, I am not the government. So I can sit down here and pontificate as what I think is ideal, sir. Sir, the other section which attracted the attention of the public, sir, was under the section called safeguards. Under the section of safeguards, and I believe the Minister of Government Business says that this was a government incentive this morning in terms of the establishment or going further to establish an independent, independent monitoring commission. Sir, one of these safeguards which HAPCAR provided was that you can have an independent monitoring authority created with the power to provide guidance and controls to make sure that interception of communication is carried out. These things were actually contemplated by the group which was set to advise on that. And in advising in relation to the safeguards, they say the following. The safeguards were developed in compliance with model policy guidelines. They are required to protect professional secrecy and to implement the mechanisms for monitoring and oversight with regard to the interception of communication. However, concerning differences in national legislation, as well as the capacity of different countries to create monitoring and oversight bodies, the working group decided that this part represents a set of recommendations that a country may choose to follow or not. So Barbados has followed it. But we are being, or the government is being criticized with the form of the commission. Look at there. Sir, at the end of the day, the point is this. The legislation has clear basis in precedent. But what I have been made to understand is that that does not invalidate the concerns raised, because I've heard today, and we've heard time after time, because somebody else does it doesn't mean that we have to do it. So we can't conveniently say when we're following precedent, or can we? But there is precedent for the legislation that we are debating currently. In my mind, that, however, precedent aside, does not invalidate the concerns which have been raised, particularly given the situation in 2013. But I would say to the opposition senator who spoke, is that perhaps if this legislation were in play in 2013, the issues that were referenced would have been illegal then. I don't know, because it was pointed out that we don't know what happened, but obviously something did that attracted the attention of the public. Now, sir, the legislation itself and the basis for it does not, however, mean it's perfect. The legislation itself has been utilized in other territories which we don't have to follow to form the basis of legal actions when a person is accused and says, let me see that warrant that you use, sir. but is often combined with a freedom of information application, and we don't have the freedom of information legislation. So sometimes these things create other issues, sir, and highlight areas where we need to improve. Anyway, Mr. President, by recap, concerns have been raised. I think it is a good thing that concerns have been raised. I think it's a good thing that as a society we could have these debates. I don't think those concerns should be shushed. I think people are entitled and ought to question when you are infringing what they perceive to be rights, and the government should be held to task and explain why. That's your job as government. Government cannot absolve itself by saying, well, we have to deal with crime. You don't want me to deal with crime? The government cannot absolve itself on the basis that we will not do it. We have not done it. You're allowed to march. The last administration talked about marching too. Had all kinds of comments about marching. And believe it or not, I've seen governments change. So all of that to say is that we also need to remember that while we're having this debate, it's been conflated with the tint issue. It was mentioned twice today. You have the Police Act with the different concerns and the fines and all else going on. And I know what it's like, sir, in a different place, to be frustrated by persons who are determined to misunderstand you. I know what it's like. I know it very well, sir. But as I've been taught, the responsibility of conveying the message in a clear and understandable manner lies with the person speaking, and that is on the government of Barbados. The answer as to whether that has been done, sir, lies with the public. And I want to end on this note, sir. In Barbados, politics is all personal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Kevin Boyce. Speakers? Oh, sorry. Senator Dr. Drakes.
Good afternoon to the chamber and all those who are listening and watching, and a warm welcome to Senator Trim. It is refreshing to have a young voice in the Senate, as I've been retired as one of those young voices, clearly. But Mr. President, I will be brief because we've heard a lot about this interception of Communications Bill 2025 in the other place, in public, in this debate throughout the course of the day. And as I was listening to the various arguments, there's one point of contact that I have not heard. Maybe it was mentioned, I've been busy, preoccupied, but I still have not heard it with the urgency I think it needs to be said with in this debate. Sir, and I make that statement on two fronts. The first is because we are hearing it from the perspective of a here and now. This administration is not going to abuse this legislation. This government is not intended to surveil and to infringe the rights of Barbadians. This administration, this administration, this administration. But this legislation will not cease to exist when this administration leaves. Because when this bill is passed, all of the loopholes and weaknesses that exist could come back to haunt all of us in this room. Because government, as we've heard, is a continuum. And we may have a government and an administration in the future who may say, well, the bill does not seek to enshrine and embed the rights of privacy in a way that citizens feel as though if they're aggrieved, they can have recourse. It does not state that they can't use it for political motives. There are loopholes. But the one critical question, and I want to state it very clearly in this legislation, and the question that keeps coming up for me is if a law-abiding citizen is aggrieved in respect to being unjustly surveilled, their rights are infringed in any way in carrying out the functions of this legislation, what are their options for recourse? Does this bill enshrine in its parts, its clauses, an option for recourse for law-abiding citizens? Mr. President, when we say...
On a point of order, sir.
What's the point of order?
Sir, the honourable senator is misleading the House, and I don't think that it is deliberate. No legislation, legislation does not usually say you have a right of appeal or have a right of redress. That is understood. The courts are there. You go by means of judicial review. If it is criminal, you appeal, etc. So the government cannot absolutely guarantee that no future government will never abuse any piece of legislation, not just this, any piece of legislation that exists. So to put that in the public's mind is to mislead the public, one. And second, that to suggest that because the legislation does not have written in some kind of appeal mechanism, then it is defective or without, there is no redress, is to mislead the public.
Thank you, Senator. Please continue.
Sir, thank you. The bill itself does not set out the mechanism by which an individual, a law-abiding individual, can seek redress if they believe they have been aggrieved by what is set out in the legislation. The bill itself. Mr. President, because I'm bringing this matter because a lot of what we are hearing from the public is in relation to the abuse of the rights of citizens and their privacy. If that is one of the main concerns, then the bill itself is weakened by the fact that it does not have within its content a specific set of guidelines for citizens to seek redress. Sir, I believe it can be strengthened if it had the inclusion of, let's say, for instance, a tribunal. Mr. President, if it had a tribunal that can cease surveillance, has the authority to destroy material in question, award compensation. Mr. President, I want to bring the example, and I said I was going to be short. I want to bring the example, Mr. President, of two UK journalists whose names are Barry McFree and Trevor Burney, who appealed to the Investigatory Powers Tribunal for the inappropriate surveillance, and they were awarded by the tribunal £875,000 just last year because in that jurisdiction, there's a clear mechanism by which, if you believe you have been surveilled inappropriately, unjustly, there is a direct mechanism within the legislation by which the citizen can avail themselves to. That is all I'm saying, Mr. President. And it is on the backdrop of saying, yes, we want the government to be strong on crime. There is nobody that don't want the government to be stronger on crime, Mr. President, than me. I've made that very clear in this chamber. But when we're dealing with these sensitive matters, that are asking us to inch closer and closer to what may appear to be the infringement of constitutional rights, I would think that we would want to have best practice, even if it is not something that is done all of the time in legislation, as was said earlier. At least for this bill, set the precedents and include the mechanism, Mr. President, so that the average Barbadian can feel as though they are being safeguarded. There are the guardrails there, and if anything happens, there is a clear mechanism for them to have recourse. Because when you are in an environment where people believe the government is all-seeing and all-knowing and having all of the seats, that is the handout. That is the olive branch. And it is not to be contentious. It is just to ensure that law, and I make this very clear, law-abiding citizens say, I support the government, bring the wiretapping. Because at the end of the day, if I am having an affair with my wife and that information gets out, I can be real frank, I am having an affair with somebody, don't worry, Kevin. That's what I'm saying, an affair with a woman, and that gets out. Given all the data breaches that we've had in the past and recently, Mr. President, right? Immaterial to any investigation, at least using the money that I get from the tribunal when I make my case, I can afford a divorce. That comes to follow. I am just saying this so that people can understand what I'm saying, Mr. President. So I understand that it may seem as though I'm saying there isn't a court system there where somebody can go and make a challenge for their constitutional rights. That's not what I'm saying, Mr. President. I am saying to build in the guardrails for us who are carrying along about our daily lives and trying to build a better Barbados as we've been asked to do. That at some point, and I still believe that this bill should have had a longer time in the public domain to bring up things like this, to strengthen the legislation. But we're here. This is where we are at, Mr. President. But I thought it instructive to ask the question, and I will end by asking it. If a law-abiding citizen is aggrieved and justly surveilled, they feel as though their rights are infringed in some way by this legislation, what are their options for recourse? Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Drix. Senator Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too join in welcoming Senator Trim to the chamber. Mr. President, I think this is an important piece of legislation, very sensitive in nature, obviously. There are a lot of emotions flowing around in the chamber and in the public domain. And there are a lot of sentiments that have been shared. The government is trying to shape a perception of the Democratic Labour Party that it is against the initiative of interception of communication. What we are against, Mr. President, is an untidy bill. When, as the old people say, when you start wrong, you would end wrong. And Mr. President, as you are well aware, this legislation was debated in the other place, voted and passed in the other place, but only because of the DLP's vigilance did it force two major amendments to the bill subsequent to that. And one of my fellow senators was at pains to give accolades to the DLP for raising those issues so that they can be amended in the best interest of the public. And she made reference to the advocate, who she said that can go back to where he belongs, something like that. But he guaranteed you that he's going nowhere, Mr. President. Mr. President, this whole conversation about crime being political, our role as an opposition is to raise issues on behalf of the people of the country. We are not here to agree with everything that the government does. There are some things that the government will do that we would agree with. There are some things that we think that although we agree with, they can be done differently. There are some things that we think are being rushed, and this is one of them. Senator before me just alluded to the fact that there was not enough time for this bill in the public domain. It's about 21 days, I think it was. And obviously out of those 21 days, 4 or 5 of them was in the weekend of Crop Over. And we are asking for some more time for public dialogue and public input into the contents of this bill. Mr. President, 2 words come to mind: trust and abuse. And politics in general, politicians in general, struggle with both of those words. From a public perception, Mr. President. From a public perception, Mr. President. I canvassed over the weekend and I came upon a house, Mr. President, not in Dickens. Dickens they've got other places in the constituency too. But we canvassed a home, and when we identified where we were from or who we were representing, we were told they were not interested. Mr. President, I was taken back, but I did not run away. I asked the resident, what happened? I am not interested. They can't hear, I'm not interested. Furthermore, he said, I am not voting anymore. And I am a Barbados Labour Party supporter. People in this country are not happy with the Barbados Labour Party, and they know it, Mr. President. And they know it, Mr. President. So the public is going to be faced with a whole set of legislation being rushed to give the opinion that they are doing something about crime, cost of living, energy, health, everything, Mr. President. But the people of this country are not happy, and that is why you would have the leader of the government having to hold a press statement on public TV to talk about the bill even before it comes to the Senate, after she would have had an opportunity to speak on this bill in the other place, Mr. President. But the public is appreciative today of the efforts of the Democratic Labour Party, who has forced the government to make these 2 crucial amendments to this legislation. So all of the grandstanding here today is only because we have saved them from having to come in here, as they are usually said to do, to defend legislation that is not in the best interest of law-abiding citizens or hard-working citizens. Mr. President, I am of the view that most of the sentiments expressed by my fellow senators in this debate, Mr. President, are of an emotional state. It is mainly driven by emotion. This is one of the first debates that I have not seen specific senators collide with individual sections in this bill. But what they have done is that acknowledging that the government has failed in its bid to reduce criminal activity and that the country is in such a state of disrepair, we have gone straight to Section 1, which says that a warrant will be issued for interception under these circumstances, and we support that. And we do support it in Democratic Labour Party. But what we will not do, Mr. President, is not voice concerns or specific sections in this bill that need further discussion. Mr. President, it is convenient for the government to compare and contrast other jurisdictions. Section 9 provides for the judge to issue a warrant with an initial period of up to 120 days. Barbados' 120-day initial period is 33% longer than those in the region, Mr. President. And it's usually around a 90-day initial period with legislation across the Caribbean. Furthermore, when you look at Canada, for example, ours is twice the maximum CDA in Canada and 4 times that of the US. 30-day ceiling, Mr. President. These are general questions. If you have a warrant, that means that criminal activity should occur within a specific period of time. It shouldn't take a year for you to get what you need, Mr. President. So that is a valid question. The recommendation from the Democratic Labour Party is, Mr. President, that the shorter initial period to force action and to force judicial checks be put in place and to align with our counterparts in the region, Mr. President. Section 13 gives the judge the options to request a progress report. Our recommendation, Mr. President, is that the progress report should be mandatory. Should be mandatory, especially given the fact that we're working with a 120-day period. And if it is not mandatory to the judge, Mr. President, it should be mandatory to the Independent Monitoring Commission. These are all valid concerns. This has nothing to do with the fact that we ourselves are concerned with the high level of crime. And like Senator Malalu, I have teenage boys, and they're out for crop over. And I am concerned too when they go out. Furthermore, I went out and I saw them at an event. And one of my sons with one of his friends. And to me, the chain that this friend had on was a little bit too big. He's a bright boy, studying overseas, surely not, from my perspective, from a nice family, not involved in any legal activity. But the size of the chain to me could draw attention that you would not want on him. And I raised the comment with my son. You know, we make a joke, he can defend that. That's what we say on the street. But it was a serious thing, and I talked to them about it. But I too am concerned, like other members of the Democratic Labour Party, of the level of crime and the things that our young men are getting into that is causing major concern. Can you believe that men are working and people are pulling up and robbing them? We are concerned, Mr. President, but it does not negate the fact that there should be wide consultation, input, genuine input into legislation and key legislation like this. Mr. President, Section 14.1 requires the authorized officer to submit a final report to the judge and to the Independent Monitoring Commission. The legislation requires that this final report should be submitted as soon as practicable. the phrasing is too broad, Mr. President. Our recommendation is that as soon as practicable, but in any event, no later than 30 days after the warrant has expired, Mr. President. It forces action in a timely manner, Mr. President, so that the case is closed. Very important to this legislation before us, this bill, Mr. President, is that in Section 5.1, it is illegal to wiretap a warrant intercept a communication. It is illegal in Section 5.1 to intercept communication without a warrant. There's a penalty of $500,000 or 7 years in jail, or both, Mr. President. However, the Independent Monitoring Commission, if they find a violation of the Act, this section only permits them to send an enforcement notice requiring them to stop or modify the activity. But that is a crime, Mr. President. To intercept without a warrant is a crime. Our recommendation to the government is to amend this bill to make it clear, give some powers to the Independent Monitoring Commission, and have them refer the matter to the DPP for consideration and the exercise of his discretion to prosecute, Mr. President. Real concerns, not political grandstanding that we've seen in here today, Mr. President. Mr. President, Section 32 gives the Commissioner of Police and the Director General of the Anti-Corruption and Anti-Terrorism Agency immunity from prosecution. It reads, Mr. President, protection of authorized officer. An authorized officer should not be liable for any act done by him in good faith pursuant to this act. It is very broad, but it gives immunity to those persons who are charged with exercising the duties under this legislation. This, Mr. President, is recommended to be removed. Section 34(1) requires the Commissioner of Police to submit an annual report. The requirement to submit an annual report, however, at this stage is only for the Commissioner of Police, but we believe, Mr. President, that the Director General of the Anti-Corruption and Anti-Terrorism Agency should also be required to produce an annual report. Section 36(1), Mr. President, gives the Minister the power to amend the first and second schedule. And generally speaking, Mr. President, it allows the Minister to make regulations. The Minister should not have any power, Mr. President, to amend the schedules. Any amendment of the schedules should be done by Parliament, Mr. President, or by the President. Mr. President, these are some of the concerns that we have highlighted in this legislation, Mr. President. I tried to do it without the emotion. We tried to look at the facts of what was before us. I want to reiterate that we support the move in this direction to help address crime, especially before it happens. We are against the notion that we do not support the bill. We do not support the bill in its current form. Lack of consultation, untidy. We've seen the process, the mistrust that has been placed on the public based on the mouthings of the Attorney General, none other than the Attorney General, who said, I could quote him because he delivered the speech. You force me to quote him now. I will quote him. The Attorney General said, Mr. President, the Attorney General said, it is against the law to intercept communications. The only exception to the rule is the Commissioner of Police.
And what do you quote? From what do you quote?
I'm quoting from the speech from the Attorney General.
What speech is that?
When he laid the Mr. President, I will be corrected.
There's no official Hansel record of that as far as I'm aware. I think you need to give your observation. You cannot purport to quote from what has not been edited and published. So you can give your impression of what he said, but you can't purport that to be a quote.
Mr. President, thank you for the clarification. Everyone knows what the Attorney General said, Mr. President. Even those on the government side, Mr. President, who made it quite clear, based on his submission, that the only way to intercept a communication was by a warrant. Although the legislation had in it Section 5.2b, which allowed interception without a warrant. The government, Mr. President, the public, Mr. President, does not trust this government. And that is one of the fundamental issues that the public has when dealing with putting trust in officers to oversee a critical component of trying to reduce crime, Mr. President, which can infringe on their constitutional rights. So when you have sections in the bill which give immunity to the officers charged with the responsibility, you have to question it, Mr. President, because it goes with the untrustworthiness of those charged. Because if there's no liability, I could pretty much do as I like, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, as I wrap up, I hope that the government would take note of not only the call from the opposition, but from one of the independent senators to allow for some more time and dialogue on this legislation in the public domain, from professionals to come in and give the insight from the Bar Association, Mr. President, so that it doesn't make any sense when we have the opportunity to have input into the legislation, to pass the legislation, make it an act of Parliament, and then 2 months and 3 months from now, back in here, fixing some of the same things that we could address in this legislation, Mr. President, today or tomorrow or next week. Mr. President, with those few words, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Walters. Senator Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too, sir, will be brief. Mr. President, I, like most of the members in this chamber, support the government's drive to reduce the incidence of crime and to render our country a safe place to be at all times. But sir, I have a few concerns about this bill. We have debated this bill as though the interceptions, sir, will happen in a remote fashion. But I am moved when I look at Section 8 of this bill, sir, where it speaks to scope of a warrant. And clearly written within Section 8, and more specifically Section 8.3. Section 8.3, sir, says a warrant may authorize entry on any premises specified in the warrant for the purposes of installing, maintaining, using, or recovering any equipment used to intercept communications specified in the warrant. Sir, what this means is that in a private house, an officer at any point in time specified in the warrant can enter your house and install equipment. It has not yet been said in this honorable chamber, but I'm saying it. It means that this monitoring will not happen remotely at some other location by intercepting telephone lines. It means that potentially You might arrive home and have a confrontation with someone who is in your house and there's violence and there's a sad outcome. And your daughter might get killed. Yes, because somebody defends themselves, sir. Yes. This legislation authorizes entry into premises. It is not, sir, as though we are doing this from a secure location elsewhere. It does, sir, allow for entry in premises. But, sir, this is a knockless warrant. This is not a warrant where you knock on somebody's premises. For this warrant, sir, to be effective, it means that the person whose premises you're entering cannot know that you are there. They cannot have knowledge that you're entering or going back to repair equipment as laid out in section 16. So it allows entry, legal entry into premises. That, sir, concerns me. Initially, I felt total support because I felt that this wireless intercept was happening remotely with fantastic technology. I had not realized, sir, that you might be sleeping in your bed and someone will be downstairs installing equipment in your phones. Sir, that part gives me doubt about something, sir. And sir, with that brief point that I raised, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Maynard. Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm standing, but permission to sit if I am being too,
Certainly.
what's the word? Hopeful. Thank you, Mr. President. I will be speaking about the bill, but yet I'm not proposing to go into the semantics of the bill. This bill that is before us, the Interception of Communications Act 2025, if it is passed, is one that is important. And it is important, sir, because the proposed bill is to be enacted by the Parliament of Barbados, in accordance with provisions of Section 49 of the Constitution. Those of us who know a little bit about the Constitution know that the Constitution is the supreme law of Barbados. And it's for that reason that I've had some concerns about how this bill was brought to, I would have to speak to the Senate. It was brought to Barbados. It was brought to the people through the House of Assembly. And I am concerned by how it was handled because the purpose for which it has been brought before us is important. We've all spoken to it. Well, a number of senators have spoken to it. We have a situation in Barbados that is galloping out of control that needs to be controlled. I think it is the Attorney General, the Honourable Attorney General, who has said that we are not to let the criminals take control. We are to be in control. There can be no argument about that. That is a fact. We cannot be in our space and fearful. And that is no longer the case. People are afraid. People are not going places. People are not engaging with people because of this fear. Crime has also taken on a different hue. It seems to be more violent. In fact, I seem it more violent. You can no longer stand up at the bus stop and go to work. You are being robbed from St. Philip to Christchurch. And they're robbing right down to your medication. That's not funny. That is not funny. It is just wrong. People are not safe. And I'm not saying that, I'm not gloating, I'm not pointing fingers, I'm not casting aspersions. The reality is it needs to be fixed. The reality is we need to do whatever we need to do to fix it. Because these people are out of control. This is foolishness. It can't work. My concern, though, is in our quest, and I say our meaning both houses, all of us who are involved in governance, to fix it. We need to be doing things in such a way that we do not have a situation where you are giving off I'm confused, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm rushing, I'm making mistakes. I've heard it said more than once today. The government's not perfect. I heard one of the senators say there are loopholes. I believe that a government with 30 seats is in the, oh, sorry, Lord Jesus, 29 seats. 30 seats? Okay, the government with the majority. And this is not I'm not making fun. You have the power to pull your best legal people from wherever to help you get it right. You also have a Senate with non-government senators who on numerous occasions join with government senators with assisting and contributing to drafting, fixing, amending, inserting, making better. So when you have that, I say, make it work, use it. So therefore, if you have a bill like this, and you want it passed on the 20th of August 2025, to issue it in an amended form on the 14th of August to persons who do not work for the government full-time, you're immediately going down a road where there's not enough time to review this in detail. And even with that, the amount of amendments or the number of amendments that have occurred with this bill allows for someone who wants to support it to say, but what else is missing? And you can't mess with a bill like this. There's this notion that an amendment in law is easy. It is not, because you go into court, you argue a point, and the Court of Appeal says, you know that was repealed, right? But if it's happening so quickly that you have to keep amending, there's no time to document it in the consolidated index where amendments usually can be found. I heard the leader of government business say, we've done a slew, that's my word, she didn't say that, but she was making the point that the government has been a part of a number of bills, a number of pieces of legislation. The problem is that the bills have errors, they have mistakes, they have things that are missing. That is not in dispute. This government has passed the entire National Insurance Act and repealed it within 3 months. So its record speaks for itself. This is not bashing. This is saying, do better. You have to do better. Amendments mess up the place. So, this bill, for example, and on that note, let me say this while I remember. When you have bills like this, Mr. President, and you want to do firearms, which is important, you want to do witness anonymity because it's connected to crime, you want to do interception of communications, and you want to do police act, how are you doing that cognate? We didn't do it. We didn't do it. Either birdie reach or people saw the light. Cognate means that you only get 30 minutes if you're not the lead, as I understand it in this place. So if we had done it, even though it would not have been done because one of these needs a constitutional amendment, if we come with 6 bills, 5 bills, that's 6 minutes a bill. Are we seriously going to talk for 6 minutes on a bill and put all of them on the same day, Mr. President? Let's not do these things. I don't want to be associated with confusion, mediocrity, inefficiency, and just lack of structure. not dealing with it properly allows for doubt. It allows for concern. And then when people push back and they are successful, you can't be patting yourself on the back, but you can do it because you all do it well, but you're patting yourself on the back after the fact. What ought to have happened, and I've heard some senators say it, had this been shared, some of the changes that have had to be made could have been made without us having our Honourable Prime Minister coming and do a press conference to, in essence, fix a mess. That's not her role. That's not for her to do. In this environment of crime where we have some guerrilla boards that feel that they're big, bad, and ignorant, walking on the road with the weapons on them, we can't be coming across as soft. Senator Drakes talked about soft, but the next 2 days, the Prime Minister was at a press conference thanking Senator Drakes and saying we're not soft on crime. That's not her role. That's not her role. Cognate means we can't spend the amount of time that we need to spend. And not discussing it in advance means that we're going to rush, we're going to leave out and have to amend. Here's the thing though. I understand the principal policy importance of national security. I understand it. I'm a child of a politician who was in a cabinet. I understand it. So you can't say everything to the public domain, but you can say things to your people. Sit down. We in the first session had meetings with the Honourable Prime Minister on issues of national security. She shared with us in the presence of other senior people who are part of security. I have not heard anybody say that anything was released, revealed, or let go. You have to bring us in, but what you don't want is to have to be taking out chunks of legislation. It don't look good. I'm grateful it's out before it was passed, so that you're not having to amend, but it doesn't look good. And optics and aesthetics are always important. In this climate, we need to feel confident that our government is in control and can run things. So, I get an email at 9:53 with an amended document, 9:53 p.m., a weekend. But I get 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 attachments. You never know what's going to come. You're not sure which one is going to be dealt with. So you have a superficial look. Flawed. There's nothing superficial about the Interception of Communications Act proposed to be. Then you look at a bill and you see things that are not clear. You see things where you have errors. You get a sheet yesterday, today, this morning of amendments. I arrive here, there are more amendments. No, please. You want me to vote on this though? And this morning I got here and I had a list of amendments. Somebody would say they're superficial. There were amendments still. Why? Okay. Mr. President, today, I should have said it when I started. I'm going to be referring to my Constitution because the Constitution is referred to in the proposed bill. Not the proposed bill, the bill. So at clause 3 of the bill, with respect to construction, it says, sir, and I quote, oh dear, nothing in this act shall be construed as being in derogation with section 11B and C, and it really should have been 11C, but hey, of the Constitution, to the extent that the provision of this act are applied in the interest of national security and law enforcement. My question is, when one looks at 11B and C, Mr. President, and because you do not have your Constitution, sir, I am going to read, because I respect you, sir, and I appreciate that you listen and pay attention, and plus I like you, sir. You can say that anyway. Section 11 of the Constitution says, sir, Whereas every person in Barbados is entitled to the fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual, that is to say, the right, whatever his race, place of origin, political opinions, color, creed, or sex, but subject to respect for the rights and freedoms of others and for the public interest, to each and all of the following, namely, B, protection for the privacy of his home and other property and from deprivation of property without compensation. C, the protection of the law. The following provisions of this chapter shall have effect for the purpose of affording protection to those rights and freedoms subject to such limitations of that protection as are contained in those provisions. This, what I'm saying, to most people, it sounds like gibberish. If you don't have it in front of you, you're not going to follow. I get it. So I'm going to ask my questions, and then Senator Nichols will answer, because if today goes how I expect it to go, he's going to wrap up. It makes sense, because Senator Thompson has spoken already. It's not a problem. I'm not being funny. I'm just speaking reality. My question is that this section 11 has A, B, C, and D. If we put in B and C, I would like somebody to explain to me why we just didn't say section 11, because A and D should have been included. I go further to say that section 20 of the Constitution also says as follows, inter alia, section 21. I'm going to get checked on. Except with his own consent, no person shall be hindered in the enjoyment of his freedom of expression. And for the purposes of this section, the said freedom includes the freedom to hold opinions without interference, freedom to receive ideas and information without interference, freedom to communicate ideas and information without interference, and freedom from interference with his correspondence or other means of communication. My question to the government is why section 20 was not included in the bill to cover both sections. And then some sections, I really don't want to. So Senator Nichols will go further. I find that section 20 should have been included for completeness, clarity, and so forth and so forth. I would have said such if I had the opportunity to, had I had an opportunity to have some kind of consultation with the government on the matter. But you cannot want me to consult with you Tuesday at 12 for Senate that is Wednesday at 11. You cannot be telling me that Sunday or Monday before the Tuesday you want me Wednesday. No, it's not happening. I don't work for the government. The government doesn't pay me the big salary. I am not a consultant. I am not employed by the government. So you need to respect my time as well, Mr. President. And I'm not going to not give you my time. You just need to do it in a way that you really want it. Because it cannot be that you just want to meet with me so that you can say that you met, but we don't make any progress. And it's not productive. I'm not helping with that narrative. Not to mention, if we were in England, we are the House of Lords. We don't meet with the House of Commons. We would have had to ask to meet with the House of Commons or summon the House of Commons. I've said that before when we debated the Bail Act. But even so, why are you coming to me to discuss things when they've already been passed? Oh, because you need me to fix it up here so that it can go back to you for concurrence. And even more interesting is that we have a press conference where it is said that it's going to happen, even though it hasn't gone to the vote. Those things confuse me, because I sing to the tune of the Lord, and then I sing to my tune. I am not under anybody's whip. I do not have to do things I don't want to do. If you want buy-in, ask for buy-in, work towards buy-in, and get on like you really want buy-in. Likewise with the public. Some things will go down better if it's explained. Not breaching national security, just explaining. Some things go down better if you allow people to have dialogue. Some things go down better if you allow people to vent. Some things get better if you have input. But the way that things come where we just are given things and it is that way or no way, it smells of arrogance. The problem with that is when it doesn't work, it still look inefficient. Who wants that? Nobody wants to be that for the government. Well, some people might, but that's not what it is about. We want the best for the country. The other thing is when you do a cabinet debate, I think you have a moral responsibility to highlight the changes you made to the bills that you don't talk about. There are certain bills, if you bring in 5 bills and you're focusing on 2 and you're talking a lot on 2 because those are the big up bills, the changes that you've made to your other bills, you should highlight. Because if not, a cognate debate means that people are going to find out when they're faced with the situation. That reeks of deceitfulness. Okay. And I don't understand how there are persons in the lower house who are representing individuals who are going to be seriously impacted by some of these pieces of legislation, and there's nobody saying, hey, wait a minute, we need to tell my people. I feel unrepresented right now. Can nobody tell me about the $10,000 if I don't have a policeman when he on duty? But we will get to that in the next bill. That came out in social media. That should have been told to the people, especially since the original amount was $500. How you going to $500 $10,000? And we're talking about modernization. For the most part, the words of the section remain almost the same. So it's only the money that's changing. You could have said something. Put people on notice. This is the thing. This is important. You need buy-in for this to work. What is not reasonable is where you do what you do, and because people say, hey, a minute, I'm not happy with this, you start saying things like, well, law-abiding citizens are not going to have a problem with it. What? So if you have a problem with it, you're not law-abiding? That ain't right neither. And this notion that wiretapping is only for criminal matters, that's laughable for people who have been exposed to politics all their life. Because politicians have been tapped for zillions of years. I grew up in my father's house, coming on the phone saying, good morning to who's listening. Good afternoon to who's listening. Good evening to who's listening. Senator Thompson is nodding. Politicians were listened to for eons. So to suggest that it's only criminal matters, you're misleading the people. So, and then why would you talk about it was happening anyway and we need to be protected by the same people that we want to carry out our protection? You've got to stop kicking the police under the bus. It was unnecessary to say that. We need the police. We can't be doing this to the police. We don't have enough of them. But that's just me. I will speak more on that with the Police Act, Mr. President. Another thing, I would be happy if somebody would explain to me, in this same bill, because you know I would read. It's a thing I do. The second schedule, sir, page 41. The commission shall be comprised of 3 commissioners, etc., etc. I'm actually going to look at, oh, sorry, let me read that, sir. Clause 1, subclause 1A. I'm sorry, sir, let me start over. The commission shall be comprised of 3 commissioners, one of whom shall be a retired judge, all the best with that, because they're judges and they're judges. B, a member of civil society. I think somebody spoke about how vague that is. I think that was Mr. World, Senator World. And C, a person nominated by the president, whoever that will be. Yeah, I went there. 2, a commissioner may be a national selected from a member state of the community. We doing that? How come? And I don't really expect anybody in here to answer that, but I would like to know why we are going to have, maybe, because it's a may and not a shall, a national selected from a member state of the community. For the purposes of this paragraph, community means the Caribbean community established by the treaty. And treaty means the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas establishing the Caribbean community, including the Caribbean single market and economy. That A was signed in the Bahamas on the 5th of July 2001, and B, to which Barbados is a party. I don't have anything against people in this community CARICOM treaty. But I would almost say, sir, with my hand in my kimbo, that we are not going to sit on anybody's commission. Abajan is not sitting on anybody's commission. So we're going to do a commission. We're going to have this type of legislation, which is to some extent invasive, and we're going to have a non-national. I'm just curious what's the rationale behind it. It's not so much an objection, but a query that I would like to have answered, which probably won't get answered, but I still thought I should put it out there in case maybe somebody might answer it on social media if I'm lucky. So yes, sir, we have, somebody said, I think it was, well, I heard today, we ought to collaborate and consult. Who said that? You. Senator Trim. Senator Trim said that. I wrote it down. I agree. The way this was handled was not the best way. It wasn't really the best way. Not for somebody that's pointing at this. I have a challenge with that after all this time. This is not the first time I've complained about the methodology of doing things. So I'm going on record saying I did not appreciate the way this was handled. I don't like it. It was too important not to be handled the way it ought to have been handled. Not to do it that way has nothing to do with me personally, but you're robbing yourself of the best possible outcome. And you're also allowing for an aesthetic of arrogance and indifference to some extent, Mr. President. So with respect to this bill, I am satisfied that, having read it, there are things missing. I'm wrapping up. There are things missing that would have made that should be in this bill to make this bill as effective as it needs to be, which is unfortunate for purposes of why you need this bill now. This is not a bill that you need to be having to come back to fix, to enhance the authority of the persons that you need to conduct this work. You need this bill to be ready now so that the work that you want it to do can happen now. You're not there yet. I'm obliged to you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Tate. Speakers, Senator Nichols.
Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this debate. So I've had to listen to most of these honorable senators, or all of them, in their contributions. And I must say that sometimes I thought that we were all not looking at the same thing. I understand that this debate takes place in the context of the apprehension and fear of violent crime and its impact on the society. I've said recently publicly on record that crime is both a social and societal problem. It is endemic, it is pervasive, it is on the minds of everyone. And everything that we do comes through the lens of how do we treat dealing with the issue of crime. Sometimes, however, that general and broad discussion causes us to lose focus about the very specific things that are in essence not necessarily controversial. And I have come to the conclusion, whether I am wrong or right, that The opposition has taken a political stance on the debate because it is convenient so to do. And I'm not coming to that conclusion in an officious way. I am understanding the strategy that they have employed. Like Senator Paris, I was here almost 20 years ago to debate, when a similar piece of legislation was greeted with the same furor, the Forensic Sciences DNA bill. A bill that allowed a police officer to go to a court to get an order to take an intimate sample from an assailant who was accused of a sexual offense in a few hours after the report of that sexual offense. And we were told by then Senator Stewart and the late Senator Dr. Law this was a massive invasion of people's privacy and this is government trampling on people's rights and a big sound of furor. And they probably had a Yankee Doodle march through town. Everything happened and we had the same effect. They came into office and that bill was not, that act was not changed. This bill before us is being waited about for political purposes. And I am not trying to be nice about it. This bill has two specific purposes. One, it sets out a framework for the first time in Barbados' law that prohibits the illegal interception of communications. And secondly, it defines a very narrow pathway that enables law enforcement to lawfully intercept communications. There is no law in Barbados that prohibits interception. When this is passed in this parliament, we will have one. But any interception, whether by the state or any individual, is not in breach of the laws of Barbados. But why this is important for law enforcement, and why law enforcement has been using interception as a means for surveillance purposes and securing the national interests of the country, what they have been surveilling and gathering could be not used in a court of law for evidential means. In other words, we have always treated evidence not obtained by a lawful means as inadmissible in a court of law. So, Mr. President, what is this bill about? Imagine you have a situation where a group of criminals in Barbados with transnational connections to other Caribbean islands, or let us say to some other Latin American or other country in the world. The police can intercept because they have the technology. The criminals are communicating on these wireless satellite communication devices, whatever you want to call it. Modern technology is not only available to the state. Even when we were in Boy Scouts, and I'm not saying that Scouts were intercepting communication, but we used to go up there in the tower at Calmarock. And they had the radio, the short radio, and thing. We listened to people in St. Lucia talking. So the idea that technology is only available to the state, and the state is going to use this to terrorize people and take away privacy, and I will come to this right to privacy thing that we're talking about as well, is again a lot of political gimmickry. At the heart of this, if the police have intercepted communication between the criminal element in this country and other criminal actors, and the police know the security apparatus of this state and within the region understand that is our transnational nature now. People are moving all across Latin America and they're trying to work how they're going to be able to infiltrate the Caribbean, because the Caribbean is a place to access different points to the United States and the eastern seaboard of North America. This is well known by the criminal element. We are not dealing with Winston Halls and the Buddy Braffetts and the Mark Youngs anymore. We get real. So that if this interception occurs, who in that household is going to come and give evidence for the state? that this conspiracy to commit this massive crime is about to take place? Who in that household? So the state would have to either get somebody who's present to give evidence that this conspiracy was afoot, or extract a confession from the suspected assailants. And recently, Caribbean Court of Justice has said that evidence of the commission of an offense alone by confession brings something else other than a confession. Once upon a time, a man went and challenged it before our highest court. The only evidence before the court of a commission of a murder was a confession which he said was extracted from him by being beaten. No other evidence, no forensic evidence, no eyewitness evidence, no circumstantial evidence. So you are asking the police in this era, in this environment, they can't surveil because there's no law that says you cannot surveil. There's no law that says you can't intercept. There's no law that says you can't decrypt. So what does the police do with that evidence? This is about the admissibility of it and putting a platform in place to ensure that once the interception is granted, and it can only be granted if you go before a court and satisfy a judge, that this is the evidence I am looking to gather. These are the persons involved. This is what we suspect is afoot. This is what we expect to gather. This is how long we will be. This is what is at stake. This is why it is urgent. All of these things have to be settled. And even when you capture the information, in order to put it into evidence in the criminal court, you have to give that to the defense. You can't come and say, well, look, we gathered this evidence and you have to take it on this recording and that, no, the methodology. And I say this, the only place in the world where the interception of communications, I mean in the common law world, I should say, is the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom does not have this legislation. All over the common law world, in Europe, North America, there is legal provision for the interception of communication. And the British have steadfastly said, we are not putting it before the judge because our interest is in national security. Our interest is in not disclosing our methods of surveillance and our sources. But many academic critics have shown that that is an irrational response. Because in the civil law countries in Europe and the other common law countries in the world, the police have been able to apprehend and to get convictions, obtain convictions by way of evidence gathered. I was reading an article, I can make it a document of the chamber, Mr. Chairman, where it taps the forbidden fruit. And the author says, foreign observers on the ongoing trial of 5 defendants at the Southwark Crown Court in the United Kingdom, as part of the Operation Tabula, I can get the clerks get the correct pronunciation, may be surprised to note that a significant type of evidence that neither the prosecution nor the defense will be introducing telephone calls intercepted in the UK by use of wiretaps. And the point I'm making here, sir, they can wiretap in the UK to help surveillance operations for other countries, but they cannot put it in evidence in their own courts. And they're steadfastly defending that surveillance is more important than the admissibility of evidence. That's fine. But in this debate, Mr. President, what I find strange is that we are now trying to assess and analyze what is basically a mechanism now for creating a legal framework which we had none before, for the interception to go through a route by way of a lawful means, and also to make it admissible in a court of law. I think that a reasonable person not interested in politics, looking at what we are doing in Barbados would say that we're creating problems for the solution and not a solution for the problem. A lot of the things I heard that are procedural concerns and things that we haven't addressed and stuff like that, that is a lot of interlocutories, not really touching to the substance. This legislation was passed in several Caribbean countries. And not only, and a lot of other, the honourable senators made reference to them. Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana, Antigua, Grenada, Turks and Caicos, Caymans, all over the Caribbean. But what I find interesting is that there has not been a single constitutional challenge to the provisions of the legislation. Not one. Not one. And it is not like constitutional challenges in Barbados are far in between. Constitutional litigation in the region is rampant. There are always cases, and unlike our courts, you bring a constitutional challenge, you can get a decision within 3 months of filing the claim because they're disposed of. They're supposed to be treated differently from ordinary civil claims. What I also find interesting is that the case law on the interception legislation surrounds the criminal proceedings and the collateral proceedings arising from criminal matters. So the substance of the bill is not under constitutional challenge, but the operation and the mechanics of it and how the state issues orders. Only last year, in Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. President, a former Attorney General was charged with some criminal offenses. And he challenged the orders given by the judge, 5 orders, intercept orders, on a whole set of constitutional grounds. Matter was disposed of in short shrift. Decent decision by the judge. The issue in that case was whether the application for the warrant was made with full and frank disclosure or exceeded the ambit of the legislation with respect to the right to a fair trial, equality of the law, due process of law, and the right to privacy. In other words, it was the application of the law in his given case, whether or not the state acted within due bounds, but not the constitutionality of the law in of itself. But we are having this debate because it is now commonplace to say, I think people in Barbados watching too much CNN, but that is just my view, that the government is in breach of the Constitution and this. And you know what? We laugh. I mean, when I say we, the people that like constitutional law and study it regularly and often and would see a case at 11 o'clock at night and call one another and we discuss it and people want to know in the house, so if we're going mad or if we're doing something else. But, you know, it was only in 2017 that we could say that we had a right to privacy in Barbados. From 1966, when we had our constitution, until the Caribbean Court of Justice in the case of Nervé, there is no single judicial or legal authority that says that there was a right to privacy that was a right in the Constitution of Barbados that was justiciable. Justiciable means that you can bring an action in court to say that the state has breached that right. Now, the right to privacy is mentioned in Section 11 of the Constitution sentence. They say it said so. But Section 11 was always interpreted as a preamble, not capable of being enforced by a court. And that is because the provisions of the Bill of Rights in Chapter 3 of our Constitution rest between Section 11 and I think 26, 27. The enforcement provision says the rights between 12 and 23 are those that are to be enforced. So privacy was in Section 11 ahead, so people assume and courts said, well, it was never meant to be enforced because if it was to be enforced, it would be one of those rights listed as being enforceable. But the CCJ said for the first time, nobody will enforce that. And when they did that, they did a number of things, and that is why that case is perhaps one of the most seminal cases in the constitutional history of Barbados. Because that is the case that abolished the mandatory death penalty. Because the mandatory death penalty was challenged under right in section 11, the right to life, and the right to due process of law. But before that was not justiciable, and the Privy Council said, no, it has to be enforced. But then the question was, how can you enforce it when the Constitution says you can only enforce rights between sections 12 and 23, and this is a section 11 right. And the court says, no, we have the inherent jurisdiction. We don't depend on the text of the Constitution to exercise constitutional powers. So we talk about the inherent powers of the court, the inherent constitutional basis of the court to act. And that's why I'm afraid of all this talk about rights being trampled. And so if I may sound, at the risk of sounding a little immodest, very few people know how it is to challenge the Constitution and do it successfully, or challenge action of the state and do it successfully. Very few. I don't mean to sound immodest. But when you hear all this talk, you wonder what it is that you are trying to excite. Indeed, the opposition in his speech said, the natives, trying to excite the natives about. But this is all political bluster at the end of the day, Mr. President. The court in the case of the former Attorney General of Trinidad, it says clearly it is accepted that the rights enshrined in the Constitution are not absolute rights enjoyed by the rights holder. Where there is constitutionality, there is proportionality. And I'm not going to get the chance to address all of the concerns raised by Senator Tate, Senator Drapes, Senator Walters today, because I only have half an hour like them. But the test of whether or not this legislation passes constitutional muster is on the basis of proportionality. What is that test? The objective, there are 4 parts. Firstly, the legislative objective, which is what Parliament intends to do by passing this legislation, must sufficiently be important to justify the limitation on the right. That is the first hurdle, not a difficult hurdle to get around. So the parliamentary intention is that we must pass this law, and what we're trying to do must sufficiently justify the limitation, because we know the rights are not absolute. Too many people are saying this is a breach of the right to privacy. But in Section 11, there are no limitations on that right. None. They're not mentioned. They're subject to the rights and freedoms of others and the public interests. Broad categories. Second element of this proportionality test, whether it is rationally connected to the objective. So you can't pass a law that has no connection with the objective, your legislative objective, which is to get evidence admissible in court that you are intercepting to thwart a certain limited class of crimes. Thirdly, whether a less intrusive measure could have been used. That is where you have perhaps some debate if you had to go to court. Could Parliament have passed a measure that was less intrusive on the individual citizen? Fourthly, whether having regard to the matters and the severity of the consequences, a fair balance has been struck between the rights of the individual and the interests of the community. Serious people who understand this will know that this legislation that we passed today will unlikely be struck down by the courts. But when you have a political motive, you will say that it is breaching people's constitutional rights. Because as I've said, and other senators have said before, the right to privacy is not absolute. In fact, there's a case from the Bahamas where the court said the right to privacy does not give you the right to commit crimes or to commit civil wrongs. Your constitutional rights end at a stage where you have gone too far to infringe on the rights of others or in the national interest. That is a reasonable rational and long accepted canon of constitutional laws. So this notion that we have this right to privacy, we didn't have it before 2017. Nobody could have brought an action in court against any state action until 2017. And you know what happened, sir? Let me get down to some politics. When the Caribbean Court of Justice ruled that the mandatory death penalty was unconstitutional, you know what that meant? There was no penalty for murder in Barbados. None. And what did the Democratic Party administration do? What they always did in the last decade. A period of mature reflection that ended up in nothingness. So your highest court has said to you in a seminal constitutional case that your mandatory death penalty is unconstitutional, and you don't come to Parliament within a week, 2 months, because you know what you're hearing now, that you've got to get consultation and something as important as that. And you know what was the effect of that? The DPP, they made sense of arraigning the boy for murder in Barbados. Because when the case finished, what the judge can do? Because we only had one penalty. And you know what was the effect of that? Men up dogs on murder charges. No bail. Case can't start. No new legislation in place. None. For months. But after 5, 6, 7 years on remand, just gotta let it go. Because if the case, the judge said, start the case tomorrow, there is no law in place. When we came to office in 2018, you don't better start with me, you know. When we came to office in 2018, one of the first things we did was to bring a constitutional amendment to bring into effect the ruling of the Caribbean Court of Justice. For some reason, the Senate, at the time it wasn't here, did not pass that amendment. I called my good friend, my former university and law school housemate, because we weren't roommates, he doesn't like that term, and I like it, and cursed him. I didn't call him senator. I said, Kevin, you know what we all just do? You know, undo the only thing that we can get a murder trial going on in town tomorrow. The government made the adjustment, came back and passed it law. But I'm saying all of this because if you want to talk about crime, all of these things are interconnected. When you don't make a determination as to what is the punishment for murder, when the court says you do not have one that fits the Constitution of Barbados, and you do nothing, the fellas don't know, and we understand that hanging and the death penalty, even although it hasn't been done since 1983 or so, was always a significant deterrent in people's heads in this society. Because there was always a warden and come and all the thing, and fellas up there say, man, they're fixing death. And it was always a way to quiet down people, and there was always talk this thing might happen again. When they're hanging people in Trinidad, things about here get quiet. If you remember the 1990s and 1998, 1999, when they're hanging, in fact, that was one of the lowest periods of crime within the Caribbean. The government just hanged 9 people one day. I felt so, well, we got to be bad behaved. But imagine what signals you told. These were not subliminal signals either. What signals were told to the criminal element in Barbados? 1, there's no penalty by the courts. 2, there's no cases for murder being done. And 3, the judges can't let me go because we're on bail now and the breaching our constitutional right to fair trial within reasonable time. 2 judges with the backlog. But this was, again, a part of the last decade, a period of mature reflection. So all of this happening around you. Every 3 months, policemen come and blow the trumpet, down at the assizes, 2 judges with all of them cases. And they want now to criticize the Barbados Labour Party administration that has increased the criminal bench from 2 to 8, that has trebled the number of prosecutors in our courts, and all the other things that we can speak on the other pieces of legislation. But Mr. President, you see this bill here? This bill provides a legal framework for the interception of communications, where there has been none before. It surpasses that in other Caribbean countries. I've heard criticisms that by Senator Walters that is 120 days the warrant should last. Well, we know the police understaffed in Barbados. Bajans are not going into the police force like before. So the number of days for which the warrant lasts, you really want to have a serious policy debate, or let us say cut it to 20 or 30 like Canada. We've got the resources of the Canadian Royal Mounted Police Force, or any province in Canada or city of New York. I always remember as a little boy, my uncle used to tell me as the first elder in the Adventist church, his budget for the church is larger than the budget of Barbados. And that was in the 80s. You really seriously can come into a chamber like this in a debate and quibble that the time period that we're giving the police to execute the warrant should be cut to that of Canada at 30 days? And saying that this is a legitimate criticism of the bill. And Barbados are concerned. Barbados is not concerned about the length of time of the warrant. Barbados is not concerned that the police are given the tools to get on with the work. And the other bills that we have to consider, why we bring in the anonymity of witnesses? Because Barbados are not coming forward. Police come and say anybody who had one of the first murder cases they did, a woman came and said, I saw Bam Bam drop the rope on his head. Nobody doing that now. Nobody's doing that now. Nobody putting their life and his family at risk with the level of criminal elements that they have going about. You had a situation here talk about the removal of a commissioner of police. You had a commissioner of police under the Democratic Party that was drinking a rum at a bar in St. Lucie, where the criminal element came into the bar because he know he's go karaoke there. And when he called, he probably his station, the fellas at Credible tell the boss, we can't come because we ain't got the transportation. The vehicle break down. And you imagine that you can go in any other country in the Caribbean where the commissioner of police is liming in a private spot just away from his home to be threatened by a man who's called himself a lord? He was arrested by who? Under which administration? Allowed to roam. Allowed to roam in this country. This is not the place or the time for the politics, though. We will have that at another place and another time. But the attempts to besmirch the name, you know, the Commissioner of Police, and Mr. President, permit me to close on this point. Senator World made references to this person. But the Commissioner of Police was removed and put on administrative leave. There has never been a court of law that has ruled that he did anything wrong. But you know what's wrong? The court granted an injunction that stopped them from filling the post. You know what they did? They never brought any charges against him. They never brought any civil action against him. But they delayed the case for 2.5 years. And then started it back. Then changed the judge. And by the time the matter got, so what got to the Caribbean Court of Justice was not the substantive case, was the injunction to put him back in his job. But the judge said, look, I'm going to put you back in the job. If the court says that you were wronged, you will get damages. He appealed that ruling. That is what got to the CCJ. By the time he got to the CCJ, on a question of an injunction not granted to him, he passed the retirement age. That's what I'm doing now. And somebody has to remind the country that of the political assassination of the office of the Commissioner of Police and the destabilization of the force, where a deputy commissioner of police's recommendations of promotion in the force were submitted to the Police Service Commission, who was chaired, the commission was chaired by a fellow who was just only a station sergeant in the police force that became a lawyer. They took a fellow who was a station sergeant and became a lawyer and put him to be the chairman of that commission in St. Joseph for the Democratic Party. the political assassination of the police force in this country. So all the young people that want to join with them and criticize the government, we got to understand what it was like to live under the Demons for 10 years in Barbados. When all this is happening, Senator World was in here on this side when these things were happening. And all this sanctimonious bloating and bloviating. You were not hearing? So, Mr. President, I will support this bill because I know that we are giving the police an appropriate tool, not only to surveil, but we are now putting in place a fair mechanism. This evidence, when intercepted, will not be put to a jury if the judge is not satisfied that all the procedural safeguards in this legislation have been met. It will not get to a jury. And all the contests in law across the Caribbean and in jurisdictions where this occurs is not on the substantive merits of the law, it is on whether or not the process has been fulfilled. We have gone further. We have done things that other Caribbean countries have not done here. The minister has a lot of power in other jurisdictions. They're not even oversight. There's no oversight in other jurisdictions. In Trinidad, there's not even any listed schedule of the offenses. So you have to assume that's all offenses under Trinidadian law. We've gone further. So, Mr. President, I support this bill. I hope that we will see a greater effort by the police to put this evidence before the court and apprehend the criminal element that has taken a place where we do not want them to run right over us. I'm obliged to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Nichols. Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to thank all the honourable senators who have spoken and the contributions. I want to respond specifically only to one particular recommendation that has been made, and we commit to passing on as usual. But I in particular want to express appreciation to Senator Gregory Nichols for what can only be described as yet another political masterclass in the law. And I want to thank him, and with these few words, I beg to move that this bill now be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no? No. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President?
Not yet.
Not yet. Mr. President, I beg to move that the Senate now resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that the Senate now resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Honourable, the Senate is now in committee.
Madam Chairman, permission, call the bill in parts.
Permission granted.
Part 1, clauses 1 to 4.
Madam Deputy President, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1 through 4 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 through 4 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 5 to 14.
Madam Deputy President, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 5 through 14 do now stand part.
The question is that part. We pause.
Madam Chair, I have amendments. I believe we indicated that we have amendments in the introductory comments on the bill, and I beg to move at this time that we amend as follows. Clause 5, Section 2, to delete paragraph B, and to renumber the paragraphs C, D, E, and F as paragraphs B, C, D, E, and F. At clause 13.2, the word authority is to be deleted and substituted with the word commission. And the same applies at section 14.3, where authority is replaced with the word commission. So I beg to move at this time that Part 2, Sections 5 through 14 do now stand part as amended.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 5 through 14 do now pass with the amendments sought. At clause 5, the deletion of current paragraph B and the renumbering of the paragraphs to B, C, D, and E as opposed to B, C, D, E, and F as currently exist. And at clause 13.2 and 14.3, the word authority is to be deleted and substituted with the word commission. The question is that Part 2, clauses 5 through 14 do now stand part as amended by the language indicated. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 15 through 24.
Madam Chair, I beg to move further to my introduction that there be the following amendments. Clause 21.9 to delete the word authority also and substitute it with the word commission. And clause 24 to delete the word and in the second place it appears and substitute it with the word or.
We pause. Senator Cummins.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are Madam President, Madam Deputy President, we are identifying the clauses as follows. As clause 21(9), we are deleting the word and in the second place it appears, and substituting it with the word or.
Madam Chair, Deputy President, Senator Cummins said she delete the word and in the second place, but it is, if you look at clause 21(9), and appears twice in the sentence. So that's why it's saying delete the word and, in the second place it appears, and substitute the word or.
Yes.
Right, but she used and twice, so it sounded confusing. I'm just trying to make it clear because we seem to.
No, I was not confused. So when I put the question, I will not confuse you.
Okay, sure. And the second amendment there is specific to clause 24 to delete subclause 5 and to renumber subclause 6 as the new subclause 5.
Honourable Senators, the question before us is that Part 3, Clauses 15 to 24 do now stand part as amended. And those amendments are at Clause 21(9), that the word authority should be deleted and substituted with commission. Okay. So I am confusing you. At paragraph 21(9), the word and appears twice. On the second time it appears, it is proposed that this word and, when used the second time, will be deleted and the word or substituted therefore. The second amendment that is proposed is that at clause 24, subclause 5, that should be deleted, in which case the subclause 6, now numbered 6, would become the new subclause 5. Are we clear? Will all honourable members in favor, please say aye. And those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 25 to 31.
Madam Deputy President, I rise again to make an amendment at clause 26(6), and the proposal is to delete the word 3 or the number 3 and substitute the word at subsection 5. So 3 is meant to be replaced with the number 5. I beg to move that part. No, that's in the schedule. So I beg to move, Mr. President, Madam Deputy President, I don't know why we're mixing you up today at all, that Part 3, Section Clause 15 through 24 do now stand part as amended. 25 to 31, Lord, you see me all over the place. Part 4, not 5, Part 4, 25 to 31 do now stand part as amended.
The question is that Part 4, clauses 25 to 31, do now stand part as amended. And that amendment, the amendment proposed is at 26(6), where it is proposed to delete the number 3 and substitute, therefore, the number 5. That's,
Subsection 5.
and substitute, therefore, subsection 5.
Yes.
So delete the number 3 and substitute, therefore, subsection 5. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 32 to 37.
Madam Deputy Chair, I beg to move that we stand part 5, clauses 32 to 37 at this time.
The question is that Part 5, clauses 32 through 37 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it. Somebody's phone?
First schedule.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule be now the schedule to the bill. Be now the first schedule. The first schedule be now the first schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Second schedule.
Madam Deputy, there is an amendment in paragraph 6(1). I beg to move that we delete the words "or chief executive officer." And I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill as amended.
The question is that the second schedule be now the second schedule to the bill with the deletion of the words chief executive officer or chief executive officer. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye?
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee as amended. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Interception of Communications Act 2025.
Mr. President, as indicated in the bill, this bill passes under Section 49 of the Constitution and therefore requires a 2/3 majority at passing and citing. Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Senator, the Honourable, the Most Honourable Jerome Walker.
Yes.
Senator, the Honourable Jonathan Reed.
Yes.
Senator, the Honourable Dr. Chantal Moronic.
Yes.
Senator King.
Yes.
Senator Paris.
Yes.
Senator Andrea Boyce.
Yes.
Senator Gregory Nichols.
Yes.
Senator Reverend C.M. Morris.
Yes.
Senator Roshana Trim.
Yes.
Her Honor, Senator the Most Honourable H. Elizabeth Thompson.
Yes.
Senator the Honourable Lindell E. Nurse.
Yes.
Senator Mr. Christopher A. Maynard.
Abstain.
Senator Miss Monique Tate.
Abstain.
Senator Kevin J. Boyce.
Aye.
Senator Dr. Crystal N. Drake.
Abstain.
Senator Reverend Dr. John Rogers.
Yes.
Senator Andrew Malalu.
Yes.
Senator Andre Worrell.
No.
Senator Ryan Walters.
No.
Mr. President, the results of the division, 15 honorable senators voted in favor, 2 voted against, and there are 3 abstentions. The vote of 15 satisfied the threshold of 2/3, and therefore the bill passes in accordance with the Constitution.
This bill, the Interception of Wireless, Interception of Communications Bill 2025 is now passed and so cited in accordance with Section 49 of the Constitution.
Mr. President, I beg to move the suspension of the Senate for a period of 10 minutes.
The question is that this sitting be suspended for 10 minutes, that's until 6:55. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. This sitting is suspended until 6:55 p.m.